Hello, we are so excited to show you our native speech capabilities. Welcome back to the English journey. Today, we are discussing a topic that bridges the gap between language learning and social success, why confidence feels more attractive. My name is Anna, and I am here to guide you through how to speak with a presence that draws people in.
And I am Abel. I am so glad to be here with you, Anna. We often think that being attractive is just about how we look, but it's actually about how we carry ourselves and how we speak. Today, we want to talk about how to use English to build that quiet confidence that everyone finds so magnetic.
That word magnetic is such a perfect starting point. When we describe someone as magnetic, we mean that other people are naturally drawn to them. They don't have to try very hard. They don't have to be the loudest person in the room. They simply have a quality about them that makes you want to listen when they speak and makes you feel good when you are near them. And the fascinating thing, Abel, is that this quality has very little to do with physical appearance and almost everything to do with the energy someone projects.
I think that is so true, Anna. I remember when I first started learning English seriously, I would walk into a room and immediately feel smaller. I would think, what if I say something wrong? What if people laugh at my accent? And that fear made me very quiet. Not a calm, confident quiet, but a nervous, invisible quiet. There's a big difference between those two things.
There is an enormous difference, and you have just touched on one of the most important distinctions we'll talk about today, the difference between confident quietness and anxious silence. One is a choice, and the other is a reaction to fear. A person who is quietly confident chooses when to speak. They're not silent because they're afraid, they're selective because they're thoughtful. And that thoughtfulness is one of the things that other people find deeply attractive.
So let's start at the very beginning. What exactly is confidence? Because I think a lot of people confuse confidence with arrogance, and I used to make that mistake myself. I thought confident people were the ones who always had an opinion, who always spoke first, who always seemed to know everything.
That's such a common misunderstanding, and it's worth spending some real time on this. Arrogance and confidence can look similar on the surface, but they feel completely different when you're around them. Arrogance comes from a place of insecurity. The arrogant person needs to be seen as superior because deep inside, they're afraid of being seen as ordinary. So they talk loudly, they dismiss other people's ideas, they always try to one-up whatever you say. You share a story and they immediately have a bigger, better story. You express an opinion and they immediately correct you.
I have met people like that, and honestly, it is exhausting to be around them. You feel like you are competing, even when you didn't want to compete.
Exactly. Being around an arrogant person is tiring. It creates tension. But being around a truly confident person is the opposite experience. It's relaxing. A genuinely confident person doesn't need to win every conversation. They don't need to be the smartest person in the room. They're comfortable enough with who they are that they can celebrate other people's intelligence, other people's success, other people's ideas. And that generosity of spirit is extraordinarily attractive.
So, real confidence is actually quite humble.
Real confidence is very humble. There's a phrase I love, and it's worth remembering for your English vocabulary as well. The phrase is self-assurance without self-absorption. Self-assurance means you trust yourself. You believe in your own value. Self-absorption means you're obsessed with yourself, always thinking about how you appear to others, always making everything about you. A confident person has the first quality, but not the second. They trust themselves, so they have the freedom to focus outward, to focus on the world around them and the people they're with.
That is a beautiful way to explain it, and I think it connects directly to language learning. When I was self-absorbed about my English, meaning I was constantly thinking, how do I sound? Is my grammar right? Are people judging my accent? I couldn't actually have a real conversation because I was too busy monitoring myself.
You have just described the internal experience of almost every language learner in the world. It's called self-monitoring, and while a small amount of it is useful, too much of it completely destroys natural communication. The irony is that the more you worry about how you sound, the worse you actually sound, because worry creates tension in your body, and tension shows up in your voice. Your words become choppy, your sentences become short and safe, and you start avoiding the interesting, expressive language that would actually make you sound fluent and compelling.
So the first step is almost letting go a little bit, trusting yourself even before you feel ready to trust yourself.
That's exactly it. And this brings us to what I call the comfort factor. This is the second major idea we want to explore today. People are biologically and socially wired to be attracted to those who seem comfortable in their own skin. When you observe someone who's at ease, your nervous system actually relaxes in response. It's almost like yawning. Calm is contagious. Comfort is contagious. And the opposite is also true. Nervousness and anxiety are contagious too.
I have experienced this so many times. If I'm talking to someone who seems really nervous about the conversation, I start to feel nervous too, even if I was completely relaxed at the beginning.
It's a deeply human response. We're wired to pick up on each other's emotional states. This is called co-regulation, and it's one of the reasons why a confident person can change the entire atmosphere of a room simply by walking in. They're projecting a kind of calm certainty, and everyone around them unconsciously syncs with that frequency.
So, how do we project that in English specifically? Because I can understand the idea in theory, but in practice, when I'm speaking a language that is not my first, I don't always feel comfortable. My mind is working very hard.
This is the most practical question, and I want to give you a very concrete answer. The first thing to understand is that projecting comfort isn't about pretending. It's about making small, deliberate choices that signal ease to the people around you. Let me give you an example. Imagine two people are asked a question in English that they don't immediately know the answer to. The first person immediately says, I'm not sure. Sorry, my English is not very good. I don't know how to say this. They fill the silence with apologies and hesitations. The second person pauses for 1 or 2 seconds, takes a small breath, and then says, "That's an interesting question. Let me think about that for a moment." Which person seems more confident to you?
The second person, without question, even though they also didn't have an immediate answer.
Right, they both had the same problem. They both needed time, but the first person's response communicated panic, and the second person's response communicated thoughtfulness. The content was almost identical. The difference was entirely in the framing and the delivery, and this is a skill that anyone can learn. It's not about being fluent, it's about being deliberate.
I love that phrase, being deliberate. And it actually reminds me of something I had to practice, which was slowing down. Because when I felt nervous, my instinct was always to speak faster, to get the words out before I made a mistake, to rush through my sentences so the conversation could move past me.
And rushing is one of the clearest signals of anxiety. We will talk in detail about voice and pace a little later because it is so important. But first, I want to introduce the third major idea, which is one that surprises many people: the role of vulnerability in confidence.
This one is interesting to me because vulnerability sounds like the opposite of confidence. Being vulnerable means showing your weakness, right? How does that make you seem more confident?
I completely understand why it sounds contradictory, and I want to unpack it carefully. Let us start with the definition. Vulnerability, in the psychological sense that we are using it today, does not mean weakness. It means the willingness to be honest, even when honesty feels risky. It means the willingness to say, "I made a mistake," or "I do not know the answer to that," or "I feel nervous right now," without collapsing into shame.
And why does that signal confidence?
Because only a secure person can admit imperfection. Think about it this way. If your self-worth depends on appearing perfect, you will never be able to admit a mistake because every mistake feels like a threat to your entire identity. But if you are genuinely confident, you know that your value as a person does not disappear the moment you say something wrong. So you can laugh at your error, correct it, and move on. That lightness, that ability to hold your mistakes lightly, is one of the most attractive qualities a person can have.
I remember the first time I made a grammar mistake in a meeting at work. I said something incorrectly and someone politely corrected me. My face went red. I wanted to disappear. But then my colleague, who was also a non-native English speaker, made a mistake a few minutes later, and she just laughed and said, "English is strange sometimes, is it not?" And everyone laughed with her, not at her, and the conversation continued beautifully.
That is a perfect real-world example, and it illustrates the principle so clearly. Your colleague did something very powerful in that moment. She acknowledged the mistake, she normalized it with a bit of humor, and she redirected the energy of the room. She didn't dwell on it, she didn't apologize excessively, and she didn't pretend it didn't happen. That three-part response, acknowledge, normalize, redirect, is a genuinely confident way of handling imperfection.
And I think for language learners especially, this is so liberating because we make mistakes constantly. That's literally part of the learning process. If we can learn to handle those mistakes gracefully instead of catastrophically, we will actually improve much faster. You will improve dramatically faster because fear of mistakes is the single biggest barrier to fluency. Every time you avoid speaking because you might say something wrong, you are choosing safety over growth, and growth only ever happens outside of the comfort zone. The irony is that the person who is willing to make mistakes publicly is the one who improves the fastest and sounds the most natural because they're actually using the language. All right, let's move to the fourth big idea because you mentioned it and I've been thinking about it. Voice, the way we physically produce speech. Can you tell me more about how the actual sound of your voice communicates confidence? This is one of my favorite topics because people dramatically underestimate the power of the voice. Research in psychology and communication consistently shows that the way something is said has a far greater impact on the listener than the actual words used. The tone, the pace, the volume, and the rhythm of your speech all communicate information about you before your words even register consciously.
So our voice is speaking even before our words are speaking.
Beautifully put. Yes, your voice is an instrument, and like any instrument, it can be played with skill or without. Let us talk about pace first, because you mentioned rushing earlier. When a person speaks slowly and deliberately, the listener's brain receives a very specific message. It registers this person as someone who believes their words are worth waiting for. Think of the most respected speakers you have ever heard: a great professor, a wise elder, a compelling public speaker. They almost never rush. They speak at a pace that gives their words room to land.
And when someone speaks very fast,
Fast speech communicates several things, some intentional and some not. It can signal excitement and energy, which is positive in the right context, but it can also signal anxiety, insecurity, or a fear of being interrupted. When someone speaks at a hurried pace in a conversation, the listener often picks up a subtle message that says, "I am not sure you will listen to me, so I'm getting this out as fast as I can." And that message undermines credibility.
that is so interesting. I never thought about it that way. I thought speaking fast in English would make me seem more fluent.
Many learners think this, and it is a very understandable assumption. But fluency is not about speed. Fluency is about flow. A truly fluent speaker can speak at a comfortable, unhurried pace and still sound completely natural. In fact, native speakers who speak thoughtfully and at a measured pace are almost always perceived as more intelligent and more authoritative than those who speak rapidly and without pause.
What about volume? I know some people who speak so quietly you can barely hear them, and others who speak so loudly they seem to be projecting to an entire auditorium.
Volume is fascinating. A voice that is too quiet communicates uncertainty. It signals that the speaker is not quite sure they deserve to be heard. But a voice that is too loud can feel aggressive and domineering. The ideal is what I call grounded volume. It is a voice that fills the space you are in naturally, without effort or strain. It is a voice that does not fade at the end of sentences.
The end of sentences. I do that so much. I start strong and then my voice just drops away, like I'm running out of energy.
That is very common, and it is worth practicing deliberately. When your voice drops and fades at the end of a sentence, it creates a subconscious impression of uncertainty. It sounds as though you are not quite sure about the thing you just said. But when you maintain your vocal energy all the way to the last syllable of a sentence, it sounds like conviction. Practice reading passages out loud and consciously sustaining your voice to the very end of each sentence. You will be surprised at how much stronger and more confident you sound almost immediately.
This is so practical. I feel like I want to go and practice right now. But let us move to the fifth idea, because I think it is one that truly separates good communicators from great ones: active listening.
Active listening is, in my opinion, the most underrated confidence skill in the world. We live in a culture that celebrates speaking. People admire those who can give great speeches, hold a room's attention, tell captivating stories, and all of those skills are real and valuable. But the skill that creates the deepest human connection, the skill that makes people say of you, that person is extraordinary, is the skill of truly listening.
Why does listening signal confidence, though? I would have thought listening more and speaking less would make someone seem less important.
And that is exactly why it is so powerful. Insecure people talk a great deal because silence feels dangerous to them. They fear that if they are not speaking, they are not being seen, not being valued. But a confident person has no need to fill every silence with their own voice. They are comfortable being present without performing. And when a confident person does listen, they listen completely. They are not rehearsing their next sentence while you are still talking. They are not waiting for a pause so they can redirect the conversation back to themselves. They are genuinely fully present with you.
And that feels so rare. So when you experience it, it's extraordinary.
It is extraordinary, and that is precisely why it is so attractive. When someone makes you feel genuinely heard, it is one of the most powerful human experiences available. We all carry within us a deep desire to be understood, and when we meet someone who offers us that, we are naturally drawn to them. We want to be around them again. We trust them. We open up to them.
So a confident speaker is actually a confident listener.
The very best ones are. And for English learners, this has a wonderful practical bonus. When you are truly listening, you are learning in real time. You are hearing vocabulary, sentence structures, pronunciation, and rhythm from the people you are talking with. Your listening practice is happening inside your conversation. And when you do respond, because you have actually heard what the other person said, your response will be more relevant, more thoughtful, and more connected. You will sound far more fluent because you are building on what was actually said, rather than just delivering a pre-prepared speech.
That is such a good point. I think sometimes I was so focused on what I was going to say next that I barely registered what the other person was saying. And then my response felt slightly disconnected, slightly off, like I was having a conversation with myself.
And people feel that disconnection, even if they cannot name it. They feel that the conversation is not quite landing, that there is a lack of real exchange happening. But when both people are genuinely present and genuinely listening, a conversation takes on a completely different quality. It feels like a true meeting of minds, and that quality is what people remember. They do not remember every word you said, they remember how you made them feel.
That brings us to the last major idea, which I think is the foundation under everything else we have talked about, the mindset shift. And I think this one is the hardest because it is not about technique, it is about how you think.
The mindset shift is absolutely the foundation. And you're right that it is the most difficult because it requires changing a deeply ingrained pattern of thinking. The pattern that most people are operating from, whether they realize it or not, is what I would call a judgment orientation. It means that when you enter a social situation, especially one involving a language you are not fully comfortable in, your primary concern is, what will people think of me? Am I performing well? Am I being judged?
I spent years in that orientation. Every conversation felt like an audition.
And when a conversation feels like an audition, you lose all of the joy of it. You lose the curiosity, the spontaneity, the genuine human connection, because you are not really there with the other person. You're in your own head, monitoring and evaluating yourself. The mindset shift I am describing moves you from a judgment orientation to what I call a connection orientation. Instead of entering a room thinking, how will I be perceived, you enter a room thinking, who is here? What are they interested in? What can I learn from them? What can we discover together?
That sounds almost like a superpower, but how do you actually make that shift? Because knowing you should think differently and actually thinking differently are very separate things.
They are, and the shift happens gradually through practice and through a deliberate reframing of what conversation is for. Here's one specific exercise that I find genuinely transformative. Before any social situation, any meeting, any conversation, any event where you will be speaking English, take 30 seconds and ask yourself one question. What am I genuinely curious about? Not what am I going to say, not how am I going to sound, but what am I actually curious about in relation to the people I am about to meet?
And that curiosity becomes the engine of the conversation.
It becomes the engine, the compass, and the safety net all at once, because when you are genuinely curious, you have an infinite supply of things to say. You ask real questions, you listen to real answers, you follow the thread of the conversation wherever it naturally leads, and you stop performing and start connecting. And the extraordinary thing is that the moment you stop performing, you start to seem more confident, because confidence, at its deepest level, is simply the absence of the need to perform.
That is such a profound way to say it. Confidence is the absence of the need to perform. I think I need to sit with that for a long time.
It is worth sitting with because it redefines the entire goal. So many people are working to become more confident by trying to seem more impressive. They are working on their image, they are polishing their presentation, but the actually confident person has stopped worrying about their image entirely. They're too interested in the world around them to spend energy on self-monitoring. And paradoxically, that freedom from self-consciousness is the most impressive and attractive quality a person can possibly have.
I want to bring together everything we have talked about today because I think when you lay it all out, there's a very clear picture forming. Confidence is not loud. It is not about having all the answers or impressing people with your vocabulary or your perfect grammar. It's something quieter and much more powerful than that.
You are describing it beautifully. Real confidence is a collection of choices that you make consistently over time. It is the choice to speak slowly and let your words breathe. It is the choice to listen more than you perform. It is the choice to hold your mistakes lightly and use them as bridges rather than barriers. It is the choice to walk into a room curious rather than afraid, and it is the choice to believe at some fundamental level that you are worthy of the conversation, exactly as you are in whatever language you are speaking, at whatever level you currently hold.
And for our listeners who are learning English right now, I want to say this directly. Every single one of the skills we talked about today is available to you, not after you reach a certain level, not after you pass a certain exam, not after you stop making mistakes, right now, today, because these skills are not about perfection, they are about presence, and presence is not a language level, it's a human quality.
What we hope you take from this conversation is a new understanding that the most attractive version of you as a speaker is not the version that never makes mistakes or always finds the perfect word. It is the version that shows up fully, speaks deliberately, listens deeply, and engages with genuine curiosity. Because that version of you, that present, grounded, authentically engaged human being, is the most magnetic thing you could possibly offer the world.